cette invitation et aussi de underscore
I thank you for this invitation.
Canada's foreign policy. My name is Chandra Madramuthu, and I'm a distinguished James McGill Professor at McGill University. I've been fortunate to undertake an array of projects on water, agriculture, and the environment over 4 decades in several regions of the world. I will focus my intervention on 3 interlinked areas: water and food security, peatlands and wetlands protection, and peace and security in transboundary basins. Agriculture uses about 70% of global water withdrawals. In water-stressed basins, such as the Aral Sea and the Nile, agriculture consumes as much as 90% of water supplies to meet irrigation demands. Canada, at one time, was a significant donor to agricultural water projects in developing regions. Sadly, this is no longer the case, and Canada has lost its voice in major water fora dedicated to agricultural water use. Water for agriculture is critical to human livelihoods and socioeconomic well-being due to the disasters around climate, rising temperatures, and increased greenhouse gas emissions. First, water security is at the nexus of climate change and national security. The effects of climatic change are already seen through a higher frequency of hydroclimatic disasters, notably floods and droughts and land degradation. The World Bank estimates that roughly 1.6 billion people live in countries with water scarcity, and that number could double in 2 decades. The United Nations reports that 258 million people in 58 countries faced acute food security in 2022. Food insecurity is particularly severe in areas experiencing conflict exacerbated by extreme weather events. It leads to population migration and tensions in refugee camps. Canada has an obligation to work bilaterally, regionally, with humanitarian organizations and multilateral organizations to curb these conflicts induced by water and food insecurity. Canada's innovations in irrigation, water management, and modern technologies for drainage and agricultural lands are world-renowned. Canada is well-positioned to disseminate knowledge and provide expertise in climate-smart agriculture for food-insecure regions of sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East and North Africa. Interventions that build resilience to drought, water scarcity, land degradation, and floods, with women at the core, ought to be promoted with our development partners. It is essential to strengthen existing platforms such as the Global Framework on Water Scarcity in Agriculture, WASAG, hosted by the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. Technical leadership from Canada is urgently sought in WASAG, aimed at the world's arid and semi-arid regions, where the poorest of the poor reside. Secondly, 1/3 of global peatlands are in Canada, covering about 12% of the country's land area. They store about 150 billion tons of carbon, thus mitigating climate change. Canada's wetlands, covering some 13% of terrestrial area, is close to 1/4 of the world's remaining wetlands, and together with peatlands, support a rich diversity of biodiversity. However, in many parts of the world, these ecosystems are being drained at alarming rates for economic development and are becoming sources of carbon dioxide and methane. By curtailing unwarranted drainage, altering the hydrologic cycle, and implementing large-scale wetlands restoration, we can slow carbon dioxide and methane emissions and mitigate the impacts of temperature rise. Canada is a leader in the development and deployment of environmental monitoring technologies. It is recommended that Canada establish an international observatory to advise on wetlands restoration, including how to balance the hydrology, soils, and gas fluxes to mitigate climate change. And finally, transboundary waters account for 60% of the world's freshwater flows, with some 153 countries having territory within at least one of the 286 transboundary basins. Many of these basins are in regions of water scarcity, food insecurity, environmental degradation, and political conflict. The Nile, Zambezi, Aral Sea, and Amazon are just a few. Competing economic interests and rising nationalism are at the heart of transboundary conflicts.
Thank you, Dr. Madrimuto. We're going to have to stop you there, but there'll be many questions, so you'll be able to raise those points that you want to raise in response to questions. We have from FLOW, the Forum for Leadership on Water, we have Ms. Emily Hines and Mr. Robert Sanford. Mr. Sanford, I believe you'll be giving the opening remarks. You have 5 minutes.
Please allow me to extend the very best wishes of the United Nations to all. I would like to begin by observing that water is already a pillar of Canada's foreign policy and has been so for more than a century. Since the signing of the Boundary Waters Treaty in 1909, Canada and the United States have shown the entire world how water can be peaceably shared through cooperation. But even in this relationship, we should be reminded that no pillar can stand indefinitely without being carefully maintained. As the U.S. becomes more crowded and hotter, water has come to the fore, both in terms of domestic and foreign policy there. The Pentagon has already identified the declining reliability and quality of water supplies across the country as a national security threat. The U.S. has also, at the same time, identified water as a potential pillar of its own foreign policy. As Canada contemplates extending the benefit of what it knows about and how it governs water as a pillar of its broader foreign policy, it should see its southern neighbor as a simulacrum of the threats and opportunities with which it will be presented as it engages with potential beneficiaries of Canada's expertise abroad. Canada should also be careful to see the needs of other nations reflected in its own immediate challenges in managing water in a time of rapid loss of hydrologic stability and climate emergency globally. In this regard, Canada has much to offer the rest of the world. In 2018, I was the lead author of the United Nations University Report on Canada's capacity to shine on the world stage by assisting other countries in need of help to achieve water and water-related climate targets of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The conclusion of that report was that if carefully deployed through measured foreign policy and skillful diplomacy, helping the rest of the world address the global water crisis could reestablish Canada's reputation on the world stage in a manner as positive and as enduring as how peacekeeping once defined our national identity abroad. More importantly, by making water a pillar of its foreign policy, Canada has the opportunity to play a key role in taking the global water crisis problem to the UN Security Council and urge the UN and its member states to develop a serious global water action agenda to address the growing human security challenges, especially as they now immediately relate to agriculture and food security. The 2018 report made it clear that all of the pieces that would be needed to make water an effective pillar of foreign policies were already in place. The educational components were there, so was the research capacity, the technological innovation, and so is the critical long-term experience in water governance, especially as it now relates to ongoing reconciliation with Indigenous people. All that is needed, we reported, is a unifying agent to marshal all of these capacities together and point them in the same outbound direction. So in other words, harnessing and fully realizing the Canadian water sector's substantial outbound capacity will need federal government's coordination and support. The creation of a Canada Water Agency could potentially be one means by which Canada advances water policy at home, while at the same time significantly enhancing its visibility and impact on the global water stage. But it can't do it by itself. The urgency of responding to climate change-induced acceleration of the global water cycle should be an impetus for government at all levels, but especially federally, to work harder to coordinate and orchestrate the significant capacity in Canada's water sector for the benefit of the country and to the world. So our recommendation, harness and coordinate the huge capacity that already exists, use the huge potential domestic links to the UN, such as the United Nations University Institute for Water and Environment, to help you step more boldly on the world stage. Show up on the world stage. Participate in global water awareness initiatives. Make water the theme in the Canadian Pavilion at the Osaka World's Fair next year. Get on board with the UN Glacier Year in 2025. Host the next UN Global Water Conference. It will not just be Canadians that will benefit from doing so. Every country to which Canada extends foreign aid in the form of shared solutions to the growing global water crisis will thank us also. And as a Canadian working for the UN, I would be very proud to see that. Thank you.
We'll go to the International Joint Commission, represented by Susan Chiblo, Commissioner, Marilyn Fair, Commissioner, and Christopher Wilkie, Secretary to the Commission. Ms. Fair will deliver the opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. On behalf of the International Joint Commission, thank you very much for inviting us. And I'm here as Canadian co-chair of the IJC with my colleague, Dr. Susan Chiblo, Canadian Commissioner, and the Canadian Secretary, Dr. Christopher Wilkie, who you already noted. I'm phoning you from Winnipeg, Manitoba, the Treaty 1 territory in the homeland of the Métis Nation, and I'm right in the middle of the Red River Basin, which is a transboundary basin. The IJC is a binational, impartial organization that is mandated by the governments of Canada and the US through the Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909 to work towards the prevention and resolution of disputes in shared waters along the boundary, and 40% of our boundary is shared water. We work with all interested stakeholders and rights holders to recommend solutions, and we have work all across the boundary, including Lake Ontario, flooding, apportionment, water quantity issues in drought regions, for example, in the prairies, and harmful algal blooms in Lake Erie. It's important for you to know that IJC commissioners, while we're appointed by the Prime Minister and President, respectively, we do not take direction from our respective governments when we make decisions. We work as a commission to find consensus and identify solutions that are in the best interests of both countries. And so with that, though, we operate by the mandates given to us from the governments. The scope of our work is defined by our governments. Our conclusions are based on the best available science and informed by the knowledge and networks of hundreds of experts and local citizens on binational boards and committees. We develop a common binational fact base and then propose options in the best interests of shared waters. It's a model that served us well for 115 years. An effective relationship with the US is imperative to any Canadian approach to freshwater management. An estimated 80% of the Canadian population lives in Canada-US shared watersheds. And these transboundary waters are also the traditional territories of many First Nations, Métis, and tribal nations. We would like to talk to you about three main challenges we experience in relation to freshwater in Canada today. The first is the complex multi-jurisdictional nature of freshwater management and the science needed to support good consensus building. When we search for local solutions, the shared boundary takes precedence over political boundaries, and we are unique in North America in that regard. To do this better, because collaboration is hard enough, we need collaboration around data harmonization. A key example of this is climate change, the challenges presented by climate change. Floods, droughts, and wildfires occur on a regular basis, and these impacts, in particular climate change, will continue to alter the flow and distribution of water resources, impacting our communities in profoundly detrimental ways, and so working together is critical for resilience. We need to improve our ability to predict climate change impacts, namely through improved flood forecasting. This needs to be done in a cross-border way, which it currently is not. This is critical for resilience. Second, the IJC's contribution is restricted by limitations in the scope of our current activities. Our mandate varies across the border. We do not holistically include or holistically consider water quantity water quality, ecosystem health, and socioeconomic factors in all the lakes and rivers where we are currently active. In some places, we only look at a subset of those pieces. In addition, our remit in all transboundary basins is not universal, in that there are watersheds where we do not do anything. The IJC needs a mandate that allows us to build mutually acceptable consensus solutions all along the Canada-US border, not in just some locations. Finally, the consensus and collaboration process itself is increasingly difficult. All laws and treaties depend on their makers remaining fully committed to them to ensure they accomplish their intended goals. It's our national interest to prevent conflict along the border, and while our countries have many issues that they deal with on a daily basis, water security is, in our view, the foundation of them all. The terms of the treaty are aimed at that specific direction, and they require domestic resolve. And I would point you to your previous study in 2004, where you made a recommendation to this effect at that time. Moving forward, we already have been asked by both parties to build partnerships with Indigenous peoples along the border, and to assist with that, we strongly encourage the federal government to further support IJC's efforts with Indigenous people, and we asked both parties to bolster domestic efforts in that regard. And so to conclude, we have served both countries admirably in keeping the peace along the boundary where water is shared. Impartiality, shared fact-finding, robust public engagement, and an ability to convene diverse interests are what make our model truly unique and effective.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last but not least, Mr. George McGraw, founder and Chief Executive Officer of Dig Deep.
Monsieur Président, honorable members of the committee,
Mr. Chairman.
Invitation. My name is George McGraw. I'm the founder and CEO of the US-based water access nonprofit digdeep.org, and I'm a global expert on the human right to water and sanitation. Imagine waking up and your kitchen sink has run dry. Imagine flushing your toilet and it backs up into your yard, making your family sick. To prepare dinner, you first have to travel miles to haul water. Over the past 60 years, high-income countries led by Canada and the US have invested more than $250 billion of foreign aid in water, sanitation, and hygiene projects abroad. And between 1990 and 2015, more than 2.6 billion people gained access to improved drinking water, perhaps the single most important contribution to rising global life expectancy. But water insecurity remains a huge issue, and now the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, goal number 6, calls for clean water and sanitation for all. People from high-income countries like ours often think that this work is only needed in other places, but that's a myth. Millions of Americans and Canadians still don't have access to clean running water or a working toilet. And with a worsening climate crisis, more families are at risk of falling into the water access gap for the first time. In Canada, the best available data shows that members of First Nations are 90 times more likely to live without running water than other Canadians. Many of those communities have faced water advisories for decades, causing significant concern for health risks and long-term prosperity. And the number of waterborne diseases in First Nations communities is 26 times higher than the national average. But Canada isn't alone in this. More than 2 million people in the United States are similarly impacted. Our Indigenous households here are 19 times more likely than white households to lack running water, and Black and Latino households in the US are twice as likely. Similar challenges exist in Australia and the European Union. There is a clear and common thread here. In high-income countries, Indigenous people, communities of color, immigrants, the unhoused, rural families, and other disadvantaged groups live inside an invisible water access gap, largely forgotten by their governments. They experience higher rates of mortality, physical and mental health issues, economic inequality. In the US, our research demonstrates that the water access gap costs our economy nearly $8.6 billion every year. That's nearly $16,000 per household, in many cases more than a family earns in a year. One could easily guess that the impact on families inside Canada's water access gap is similar. Fortunately, our research also shows that for every dollar we invest in closing the water access gap, we get a $5 return on that investment. But the crucial point is this. Access to water and sanitation is a basic human right. And for millions of people in the US and Canada, two of the wealthiest democracies on earth, that right is not being adequately protected. I've spent my career working alongside other activists to defend the right to sufficient, safe, acceptable, physically accessible, and affordable water and sanitation services, recognized as a human right by the UN General Assembly in 2010. Many high-income countries haven't enshrined this human right into their own laws, and that must change. The governments of the Northwest Territories and Quebec have paved the path to codifying the human right to water in Canada, but efforts like these must be led by national governments here in Canada, in the United States, and globally. Codifying the human right to water makes access to safe water and basic sanitation a legal entitlement rather than a commodity or a charity. It spurs the development of government programs to close the water access gap, and it gives people living in that gap, especially sovereign Indigenous nations, a key advocacy tool, ensuring that they're respected and empowered as part of any decision-making process. More importantly, it ensures that your race and your zip code no longer determine whether you and your family have access to a working tap and a flushing toilet. But for now, the promise of a human right to water in Canada remains unfulfilled. I say all of this not to shame anyone for failing to meet their obligations, but to inspire you. So to close, I'll share a glimpse into the most incredible part of my job, that moment when someone turns on their tap for the first time. It's impossible to describe this experience as a single thing. Sometimes it's met with tears or shouts of happiness. Other times, hordes of kids jostle around the sink, waiting to be the first to touch the water when it comes out. And perhaps my most favorite of these moments, though, are the quiet ones. Those few times when a person just opens the faucet, watches the water pour out, and then closes the tap again without saying a word. It's a powerful reminder that access to water itself really doesn't deserve much fanfare. After all, it's our basic human right. Thank you for the invitation and for your time.
Thank you very much. We'll go to the round of questions. We'll start with Mr. Deltel for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Bien heureux.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delighted to see my colleagues here, and I'm delighted to see my colleague from Milton in fine form. I'll begin with you, Mr. McGrath, with my questions, pursuing a reflection on access to potable water, drinkable water. As you underscored, it's a basic human right. Everyone recognizes this fact. You appropriately underscored the problems that First Nations in particular are facing in this country, and you gave us numbers, statistics, stating that despite the efforts made, the issue is grave for Canadians, and the access to clean water has not been resolved for most First Nations. I would like to know if there are other human sectors, communities, other groups in Canada that are directly affected by the lack of access to clean water.
Thank you so much for that question. By my knowledge, the best data we have is on First Nations communities, and Canada, like the US, isn't collecting comprehensive data on water access across the board. So it's difficult to pinpoint other communities of need. In the US, for instance, we've had to use proxies using census data and others to first identify these communities, but then actually send physical researchers in to look. Just to give you an idea of the places we found these communities in the US, they're often in poorer, more rural areas. They're often in ethnically diverse areas along the border, or in formerly prosperous, now poor economic corridors, and in what are for us Native American territories and reservations. So I don't have any more information for you on other impacted groups, but if the Canadian experience closely mirrors the US one, like I assume it does, I would be surprised if you wouldn't find other communities in need.
Dans votre allocution, vous avez mentionné.
In your statement, you mentioned that Quebec was opening the way with regard to access to clean water, and that the example of Quebec should be reproduced and taken up by the federal government, the national government. Do you have a precise example to give us as to what Quebec is doing that could inspire us all?
Yes, absolutely. The Quebec government has enshrined the human right to water in its territorial legislation. And I'm encouraging the Canadian federal government to do that at the federal level. I'm engaged in that same advocacy down here in the United States. I think we see that when we enshrine human rights protections in a country's founding document, like its Constitution or its Bill of Rights, or even in separate laws, there's a massive move toward protecting those rights, and they become very powerful tools for impacted communities to use in their own advocacy. So yes, in this way, Quebec is a leader not just in Canada, but internationally.
Can you give us an example of a massive action of Quebec in that file, based on what you have said?
No, I'm not aware of Quebec making massive moves on this yet, but I can give you an example. Here in California, we enshrined the right, about 10 years ago now. And our first piece of legislation on that passed last year. And it's created a safe and affordable drinking water fund here in the state that has made a massive impact in access, but I think there's a big lag in time between the recognition of the human right to water, its codification into law, and then eventually its use to produce policy and programs, which I'm hoping will follow quickly in the Québécois example.
Merci. Ma question maintenant s'adresse à Madame Fair.
My next question is for Ms. Fair. I hope I am pronouncing your name appropriately. First of all, technically speaking, you are a member of the International Joint Commission, but do you have a view with regard to the relations that can exist between provinces when there are shared waterways? Or are you simply involved in discussions between Canada and the U.S. and not just between provinces?
Thank you. Yes, you pronounced my name correctly. Thank you. It has a French pronunciation also, Phare. The IJC is created by the two countries, Canada and the U.S., pursuant to a treaty, but we work in collaboration with state and provincial level governments also, and Indigenous governments. In particular, we do so through a program called the International Watersheds Initiative, where we have a specific mandate to bring all players, governments and citizens and nations from within a watershed to try to create transboundary collaboration for the best interests of shared waters. And yes, we routinely deal with provinces and territories and nations in the work that we do in order to find that shared common vision.
Based on your experience, do you think that provinces worked well together? Is that as easy or as good as we have relation with America?
In my experience through the International Joint Commission, yes, the water management is very complex. The science is hard to determine. The engineering is hard to determine. The people work together very, very well. Jurisdictions, once you get up to the level of power and authority, it gets a little harder. And I think that climate change is making that more difficult. But you have to remember that the Boundary Waters Treaty was created in 1909 over just that kind of a conflict. It was based out of some things that were happening between Alberta and Montana at the time, water apportionment issues. And this tool is meant for just that kind of situation.
Thank you.
It is.
Thanks very much. Ms. Phare, we'll go to Mr. Van Koeverden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses who have joined us today for this important study. My question will be for Mr. Sanford. Mr. Sanford, it's not a coincidence that I'm wearing my UN pin today on my lapel. I wear it almost every day. I'm happy to say that we're matching today. I'm a big fan of the Sustainable Development Goals. And my question today is prefaced with something that I find very troubling. Recently, Conservative MP Leslyn Lewis, Pierre Poilievre's shadow minister for infrastructure and communities, not only supported and sponsored an official House of Commons petition that calls on Canada to expeditiously withdraw from the UN, but it's also become clear that she had a hand in drafting that petition. In that petition, MP Leslyn Lewis cited the negative consequences that things like sustainable development impose on Canada. Now, I'm loath to amplify any of those harmful conspiracy theories, but they are regularly shared and used by Conservatives, and I think it's really important to recognize how much vital work Canada and the UN does together. I've been fortunate enough to witness some of it in Francophone Western Africa, particularly on clean water. So, Mr. Sanford, could you articulate for this committee and for this study how essential the work that Canada and the UN do together to ensure water security, safety, hygiene, and sanitation for those less fortunate?
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you for your support of the UN. And let me say that what is really important about this is that the vision and the image of the UN are very much affected by current events and by media. And a great deal of the attention right now happens to be focused on the UN Security Council and particularly the two wars that we're fighting or being fought. But one of the things that's really important to understand about the UN is that there is no organization like it who, beyond and behind all of these events, they are the institution supported by the member states that are there to help in humanitarian ways. And without that, we would not be able to help refugees. We would not be able to put people back on a course of a productive life in a different place. And more importantly, we are there when there's drought crises, when there are climate change impacts. And countries like Canada as donors and also participants in those particular programs are vital to holding our world together right now in a period of very great geopolitical instability. I hope that offers some answer to your question.
Thank you, Mr. Sanford. It does, and I would note that there's a great deal of mis and disinformation out there, and that anytime it's amplified, it does more harm to the institutions that are doing all the extraordinary work that organizations like the UN.
I'd like to submit to you that for almost all of us who work in this domain, this is not a job; it's a calling. And the committed people that we have working with us, they are committed wholly and in their minds and in their hearts to doing what they can for all of humanity, and that is global citizenship. And Canada, as a global citizen, we are grateful that they're supporting these programs. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Sanford, and you can count on me to continue to be a proponent and a support of the United Nations and all the global citizenry that comes along with that work. Mr. Chair, how am I doing for time?
Sorry, 2 minutes. 2 minutes left, basically.
Okay, great. I'd like to move on to agriculture and water usage, if I could, with perhaps Dr. Madra Muthu. With respect to international development and how important it is that we ensure global water security and food insecurity are not issues that persist, particularly around climate change. Right now, we're seeing more frequent droughts, floods, and extreme weather events, which are impacting people's food security, which just increases a lot of unrest around the world. We know that a lot of conflict is often spurred on by water insecurity and food insecurity. Could you speak to the importance of Canada's role globally in ensuring that we decrease that sense of insecurity?
Yes, thank you very much for your question, member. I'll be happy to elaborate. Canada's brand with respect to food and food production is well known around the world. We have several assets that we build on and comprise our strength in our deliberations globally. First of all, we have a very safe food supply system. We have environmental controls over our food supply system, which other countries do not have. We're able to use the most modern technologies, whether it be precision agriculture, precision irrigation, best genetics for crops and livestock. We have it at our disposal, and our farmers make best use of all of these technologies. If you look at our production statistics for all of our major cereal crops, for example, we have some of the highest yields under some very difficult climatic conditions, but yet our farmers have risen to the challenge and have been able to produce for us.
And if you would, could you point out the number one threat to that security?
Very briefly, please. We're running out of time. Number one threat to that security?
The number one threat to that security is drought. And how do we do drought proofing and drought protection to enable that our crops yields can be stabilized, both during wet and dry periods?
Merci. Madame Posé.
Madame Posé. Yes, thank you. Thank you to our witnesses here to help us really understand the issues surrounding water. My question is for Marie-Hélène Farr from the IJC. I think you do very important work, and it can't always be easy, given the fact that you have to work with the U.S. for one. Let's go back in time to 2002. The journal Le Devoir published a report on the 11th report of the IJC, and it stated that the IJC is no longer simply drawing up, giving a picture of the situation of ecosystems. There was an action plan and there were 2 priority points: addressing sediments and biological aspects given the invasive alien species. There was also the issue of BCPs and other pollutants, environmental pollutants. And I quote, "More than a decade of research shows the serious effects of exposure to these toxic substances in the areas of these ecosystems. Public health continues to be affected in these areas of concern." So already back then in 2002, things were not that easy to manage. Since this report is publishing, can you tell us with great confidence that governments have focused on protecting transborder waters, the quality of the resource, and the quality of monitoring of this resource?
Yes, I would say that they have. Without a doubt, we have, particularly, I'll speak on behalf of the International Joint Commission because we are not the government, we are separate, but they have supported us in our work through, for example, our Health Professionals Advisory Board, which has been doing research all along the boundary on health impacts of all kinds of different chemicals and situations, etc. And so I urge you to look at some of the work of the Health Professionals Advisory Board. And a number of our boards and our studies focus on water quality and their impacts not only on ecosystems but on people. And
sorry, I'll interrupt you. So from what I gather, from a regulatory and legislative standpoint, there's been a tightening up of things, and there have been advances and improvements. In 2016, the IJC created the Champlain Lake and the Richelieu River group, and in 2002, a report was produced on the causes and the risks and potential solutions for potential flooding in the Champlain Lake and Richelieu. This is, of course, affecting Quebec, Vermont, and the Richelieu region. The new Canada Water Agency, no funds will be provided for these trans-border plans. What is your position from the IJC, given that the Water Agency is ignoring these water plans in Quebec that actually affect both sides of the border?
The Lake Champlain Richelieu River study is a wonderful success of the way we can collaborate, and we submitted a letter to the Canadian government on the creation of the Canada Water Agency, supporting the creation of that agency and urging it to focus on collaboration. And we don't take a position. We don't have positions in the way you're asking the question. We do what we're asked to do under the Boundary Waters Treaty, but we are definitely in support of collaboration, particularly through the Canada Water Agency, and we do look for the governments to support the recommendations of the Lake Champlain Richelieu River study, for example, as an excellent example of how we can collaborate together.
Thank you. We'll ask if they support it. You sent in some documents and you talked about traditional knowledge gained and acquired over decades and generations. This is an important source of information. How exactly did you collect this information? How is it integrated within your work?
So I'm going to ask my colleague, and I'm hoping her internet is sufficient, to answer this question for us, if you don't mind. Sue? Thanks.
Thank you for that great question. Typically what happens with all different types of scientific studies is there's a component where Indigenous science, it's coined in many different terms, but recently Environment Canada Climate Change has an Indigenous science branch, so I prefer to use the wording that government is using. And so Indigenous science is included in the report.
Sorry, unfortunately,
to try to...
Sorry, Dr. Chiblo, unfortunately, the
Yeah.
sound quality is not good enough, and that means that we can't hear you out on this because of the harm it can do to the interpreters. I'm sorry about that.
À ce moment-là, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, may I perhaps ask that the witnesses send in her answers?
Parce que
Yeah.
Yes, we can do that.
Thank you.
Yes,
Merci.
we will have that.
Alors, j'aurais une question.
Thank you. So I have a question for Mr. Sandford. Your contributions are really inspiring. You have a wealth of knowledge. You sent in some documentation, and your colleague will be here in the second hour of our meeting. You're saying that Canada hosts a United Nations working group on water quality. There are 5 or 6 recommendations that have been formulated there. I perhaps am wondering about something. When you say that's an effective policy, foreign policy tool, I think to start with, Canada should start by being an example to others. But when you look at the situation in Indigenous communities, there are some issues around the oil sands. Other communities are complaining about nuclear waste. Other Indigenous communities still have no access to drinking water. Would you not be I'm sorry, you've really gone over. Mr. Sandford, you'll be able to answer the question a bit later. Or you can send in a written answer. Mr. Boulris, you have the floor.
We can't do it right now, Mr. Sanford, because we're way over time
Okay.
for the. But I mean, when somebody else brings up a question to you, you could use the opportunity. Mr. Boulris.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for inviting me to this important work, to this important committee. The witnesses in this panel have really shed light on a very concerning issue given the climate crisis. 2023 was the warmest year ever registered in history, and there have been areas where there have been droughts, in some areas flooding and other issues. This might have been the worst summer in some respects. Some experts are telling us that it's been probably the best summer we'll have had in the next 50 years, and that is in no way reassuring, whether that is for the most vulnerable among us or for the field of agriculture.
Ceci étant dit, j'aimerais poser ma...
This being said, my first question is addressed to Ms. Emily Laura Hines. I believe you have quite extensive experience in Canada, UK, Iceland. You've participated in many, many conferences, including the UN Water Conference. You have a good perspective. So what's Canada's reputation vis-a-vis water in the world?
Kind of falls into the reputation of the myth of plenty. We tend not to show up even to most conferences. If you look at World Water Week in Stockholm, the UN Water Conference in New York, or the upcoming Global Water Forum in Bali, we usually are not there, or if we are there, we are not presenting and taking the opportunity. People still think of us as having everything figured out, which Monique MP Posé has pointed out is not correct. And I think that Canada can be there to show that we are working and innovating and challenging kind of the status quo on what we've been doing the last 20 years and why it's not working. So yeah, we definitely aren't showing up enough.
Merci beaucoup. C'est intéressant, même si...
Very interesting, although it might not be very praiseworthy of our governments or our political leaders. Our leadership in fresh water should serve as an example, in fact. Over the course of our study, we've tried to involve the younger generation into participating in the solution of these. Do you have any recommendations or suggestions of what to do for greater participation by youth? Youth are very interested. Youth Climate Corps, for example. Could we sort of militate to get a better participation rate?
And especially paid opportunities. I had to work 11 unpaid internships during my undergrad and postgraduate degree. And I think what we're doing is too often we link water with climate and they become a subcommittee. So we need the Groundwater Youth Network, for example, is doing amazing things with the UN. I spoke at the UN last year with them, but we need a Canadian earpiece for that as well. Also, there are many students who are currently in water programs across Canada and they are not being given apt opportunity to start working. So that first step should be created for them. The agency is one way to do this, of introducing a host of new career and young professionals into government and water policy in general.
Merci beaucoup. Une petite question à...
Thank you. Short question to Mr. McGraw. You stressed, rightly so, I believe, one of the major objectives of the United Nations, number 6, in fact, to make sure that there is potable water for all human beings. It's a fundamental human right. Quebec and our Northwest Territories have set an example legislatively and institutionally to recognize this human right, but it's not the case with the federal government just yet. Why do you think it's taking so long for them to establish? There's still dozens of First Nations who have no access to fresh water and potable water on boil water directives.
Only guess is that water for so long has been an issue that countries like the US and Canada can't ignore because water is perceived as being so abundant. But now we know from our recent experience and from learning from generations of folks who have lived without it how deeply inequitable water access is across these places. We assumed it was abundant. We assumed that everyone that lives in Canada achieves a universal standard of access to the basic necessities of life, and now we know that's not the case. So I'm not sure why Canada hasn't taken action in the last few years to do this at a federal level, but we're behind. And we need not only a recognition of this right, but some criteria around enforceability to give it some teeth and allow people to advocate for themselves. There's really no time like the present. Our neighbors are suffering tremendously.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur le Président, il me reste combien de temps?
How much time left, Chair? 30 seconds, maybe? All right, very quickly then, I'd like to come back to Ms. Laura Hines. Participation of youth for sustainable development in water resource. Do you have any other examples of other countries that have more involvement by their youth?
Has a water youth network. You can look at One Water out of the UK and Oxford University. I would say Europe is doing quite well with this, and arguably America as well. We also have the North American Water Youth Parliament, who's focused on the Columbia Basin, who can definitely get more help, and Waterlution in Canada.
Thank you. Thanks very much. We're going to have to truncate the second round a bit because there's a vote later, and we don't have the leeway to go over time. So we'll do a 3-minute round. Mr. Mazur.
3 minutes?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Farr, the International Joint Commission sent a letter to the federal government on September 14th, 2020, regarding the water agency. You signed that letter. Do you mind submitting that letter to the committee so we can use it in our study?
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll submit it.
The letter stated, and I quote, "Constitutionally, the Canada Water Agency cannot take oversight for all water management in Canada," end quote. Can you provide Can you provide in writing the analysis that led to this statement and any constitutional limitations of water management in Canada?
We can certainly undertake to get you something on that, yes.
Okay. And the letter also stated, and I quote, "The Commission endeavors to consider and balance a wide range of interests in formulating its advice, including municipal water and wastewater, commercial shipping, hydroelectric power, agriculture and aquaculture industry, recreational users, and the needs of shoreline property owners," end quote. Could you provide in writing a list of interests and concerns that these specific entities have raised to the Commission on the topic of fresh water so the committee is aware?
Yes, we can.
And the letter...
This is mostly in the context of, just to be clear, that's mostly in the context of the Great Lakes. But we'll provide you what we have, yes.
Okay. The letter also mentioned that there are ecological challenges associated with managing watersheds in Canada and the U.S. Could you provide in writing a list of ecological challenges the letter is referring to?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I would like
some of it might be in the form of reports that we've written in the past as well, or new information. So could be an amount of info.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I would like to give notice of the following motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to
Given
speak to
that
motion.
Given that Justin Trudeau's Environment Minister has publicly stated, and I quote, our government has made the decision to stop investing in new road infrastructure, end quote. Trudeau's Environment Minister has also stated that funding new roads and highways is not needed because public transit and current road infrastructure is good enough. This is while Canadians in large urban centres like Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal spend hours in traffic each week, and rural Canadians do not have access to public transit. Canadians living in rural and remote areas also rely on new roads and highways to raise their families. Rural Canadians do not have the luxury of being able to walk to work or to the doctor's office. Rural Canadians cannot rely on a subway to get to nearest city because there are no subway stations in rural communities. Many municipal and provincial governments across Canada were rightfully outraged when Minister Guilbeault announced the Liberal government will stop funding new road infrastructure. Justin Trudeau's Environment Minister is also plowing ahead with his plan to ban all gas-powered passenger vehicles, preventing millions of Canadians from using a vehicle. Many Canadians, especially rural, northern, and Indigenous Canadians, are worried they won't be able to live or work because Minister Guilbeault's policies will directly deprive them of owning a vehicle. No material purchase provides Canadians with more freedom to live and work than the purchase of a personal vehicle, especially in a nation as large as Canada. The recent announcement from Minister Guilbeault to stop funding new roads and highways comes at a time when Justin Trudeau is deliberately increasing the price of fuel on Canadians. The Liberal government plans to increase their failed carbon tax on April 1st by 23%. The Environment Minister also stated earlier this month, and I quote, the government does not measure the annual amount of emissions
Point of order.
that are directly...
Point of order, yes.
Mr. Chair, is this a speech or a motion? We have witnesses that I'm dying to ask questions
I
for.
understand.
Could we just have a motion, please?
Mr. Mazur has the floor, and he's giving notice of a motion, and so he can do that.
Thank you. So I'll start that again. The Environment Minister also stated earlier this month, and I quote, the government does not measure the annual amount of emissions that are directly reduced by federal carbon pricing, end quote. Canadians are sick and tired of this Liberal government's ideological crusade against vehicle ownership in Canada. And Canadians are also sick and tired of this government's constant undemocratic tactics of always shutting down debate on issues that they expect addressed. Therefore, the committee urges Minister Guilbeault to publicly testify before the committee for no less than 2 hours to explain his radical plan to stop funding roads and highways across Canada, and report to the House of Commons that Minister Guilbeault's plan to stop funding new roads and ban gas-powered vehicles is not environment policy. It is government-imposed deprivation. Thank you.
So you've given notice, and we'll go now to Mr. Longfield.
And apologize for the disrespect being shown to you. Dr. Madramuto, it's an honor to have you here, and thank you for all the work you've done over decades, as you said, in water. I want to focus on the science around water, also as chair of the Standing Committee for Science and Research. At the University of Guelph, we have Professor Thafasathan, who's been doing riparian planting research to look at nutrients coming off the soil being absorbed by the growth of plants, which also sequesters carbon. We have Ed McBean, the Tier 1 Canada Research Chair on Water Supply Security. Could you comment on just two examples there? I know you've been to the University of Guelph. I know you visit other universities in Canada. Could you comment on the importance of investing in research around water and the role that university research plays in water security?
Thank you very much for that question, member. Let me say that your question is a very serious question, and it certainly deserves a proper response because of its heightened interest today around the concerns of water. There are several gaps in water research in the country. We have a handful of universities that do research, excellent research in water, certainly stands up to international peer review, but it is important that we find these gaps, identify the gaps in research. You've talked about vegetative buffer strips to reduce nutrient pollution and other areas of research. But when you think about the water sector and how broad it is, some of the areas that we know very little about is some of the emerging new pathogens and contaminants, microplastics, for example, that are of serious concern to the environment, and we need to pick up pace on that to fund that kind of research on those new emerging areas. The use of remote sensing technologies in agricultural production needs to be expanded. We're a leader in RadarSat, for example, and how do we bring that to the forefront by bringing new researchers and new science to the program?
That RadarSat as a way of looking at soil health. Also, new types of crops that you mentioned with better root structure to withstand droughts. It's not always about water and using the same water as before, but finding new ways of conserving water in agriculture. Very briefly, could you just agree or disagree with that statement? And then, because I only have 10 seconds left.
Yeah, so...
I certainly agree with your statement, and there's much more that we can do in water conservation, in new technologies to conserve water, automate water delivery systems to fields, and that can be expanded on.
Thank you. Madame Posé.
Alors, bien, Monsieur Stanford, je pense.
My question will be addressed to Mr. Stanford. I'll come back with a question. You have a vast experience. So, as I was saying earlier, the international scene, the portrait internationally is one thing, but here, when you're close to the ground, if you'll excuse the pun, we have a lot of fresh water in Quebec. I think we have 1 million lakes. It's clean water. We have all sorts of potential in that sense. But as to quantity, the quantity is there, but the quality in many, many areas is not adequate, particularly in First Nations areas, whether it's in this area, in Gatineau, with the river, the Ottawa River, picking up nuclear contaminants. A few kilometers from Edmonton, for example, there is no potable water. Don't you think that Canada has some serious work to do before we can preach to others?
This question at the same time. If we want water to be a pillar of foreign policy, we have to get our own house in order first. And we can do this simultaneously to reaching out to helping others, because there are mechanisms, as Dr. Matsumoto has pointed out, and technologies that we do have that are fully exportable. But there's a Bolo effect that can happen here. We can help ourselves get our house in order because we have to, because as already has been indicated, the global hydrologic cycle is accelerating and things are not going to be as they have been. And we need to prepare ourselves for that in order to address our own problems. And in addressing our own problems, we may be able to help others.
Thank you.
Monsieur Boulris. So consequently, there's multiple benefits here.
Merci,
thank you, sir.
Merci. Monsieur Boulris.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I will pursue with Mr. Stanford. I just want to ensure that Just like Mr. Van Couverden, you can count on me to support the important work of the UN and its agencies. Here, some media or commentators have been bad-mouthing them, but that's another issue. Mr. Stanford, all of the present data states that this coming fall, this coming summer will be difficult, will be tricky. We've talked about droughts, flooding, etc. This will have repercussions on Canadians and on the Americas overall. As we've seen and stated, Canada must be prepared to defend its lack of action because we didn't do enough in the fight against climate change. It's certainly a threat for national security. What must the government do immediately to prepare for this?
I think the most important thing that can be said in answer to that is that we do face an emergency. Almost all the indicators that we see over much of the country from the British Columbia coast to Quebec indicate not just drought, but extremely dry conditions and vulnerability to wildfire. And this is going to affect not just the sectors we normally think. It's going to affect a wide range of economic sectors in very deleterious ways. And there's no way that we can see at this moment that this is going to be alleviated by last-minute rainfalls or snowfalls. So the emergency preparedness as a nation is vital if we are to understand how we can save money and save lives this coming summer. And it's a no-regret strategy because we know that as climate continues to warm, we're going to have to be prepared in those ways and to change the way that we react to these emergencies. Rather than reacting, we have to be able to prepare for them and understand what we have to change in order to become more resilient.
Thank you very much. That's all the time we have.
Being here today. I'd like to start with Dr. Madremutu. I'd like to follow up on his comments. Dr. Madremutu, you said that agriculture uses about 70% of global water withdrawals in your opening statements. Is it a similar figure for Canada, or does Canada use more or less, or can you shed some light on that?
Thank you very much for your question. It all depends where you are in Canada. If you take the South Saskatchewan River Basin, it is as high as 70%, and there is water stress in that basin. The same happens for some of the basins in southern Alberta, for example, the Oldman River as well. Generally, we have an abundance of water, and so there's quite a bit of spatial variability. Obviously, out in eastern Canada, we have an abundance of water, but we do have water-stressed basins in Western Canada, yes.
And can you speak to the role that irrigation projects can play in water security and food security?
Absolutely. Irrigation is essential for, especially in these water-stressed areas, to be able to provide the additional water to meet crop water demands, to maintain stability of yields, and to ensure that farmers can get the same yields, whether it be in the dry seasons or the wet years or dry years. It allows those farmers to keep enhancing their availability of high yields. Today we produce about 30% more crop yields with much less irrigation water than we did 25 years ago due to the modern irrigation technologies developed right here in Canada.
And this committee has also heard how irrigation, in addition to increasing crop yields, can increase carbon sequestration in the soil, in farmland. Can you elaborate on some of the benefits of carbon sequestration in the soil and how we can do more of that with our policies?
Thank you. Irrigation alone would not be able to sequester enough carbon in the soil. We have to do other things like reduced tillage. We have to do crop rotations. We have to do more leguminous cropping in our soil practices and cropping practices to store more carbon in the soil. As we store more carbon in the soil, we reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that is emitted to the atmosphere, and thereby helping to reduce the increase in global temperatures as well.
Okay, and just to be clear, irrigation alone could not meet our CO2 targets, but it would help. Is that
it would help,
safe to say?
But that alone would not be able to meet the targets, no.
Could you give us an idea of how much it would help? Like, would it get us halfway there, or
a quick number? A quick number.
It's probably about 10 to 15%.
Thank you very much, Madame Chatel.
Microphone, please. Microphone, please. Thank you to our witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to our witnesses. Yes, I have a few questions for you. First off, I have a question for you, Mr. Madremutu. Earlier, you were speaking and we heard our colleague for the UN organization speak to this. We are experiencing climate change. Developed countries are responsible for most of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world, but the less developed nations are only responsible for 1.1% of our global CO2 emissions. Nevertheless, it is the people living in these countries, the most vulnerable on the planet, who are suffering the most from the extreme ramifications of climate change. We hear more and more talk about drought. Clearly, in these more vulnerable areas of the planet where people are very exposed to climate disasters like tsunamis, extreme floods, hurricanes, storms, etc., whereas Canadians are expecting that its government act responsibly. And we talked about being a responsible world citizen. I'm concerned to hear say that some members of the Conservative caucus want to move back from their citizen responsibilities, the responsibilities as citizens of the planet. You stress the importance for Canada of being a leader, of demonstrating technical leadership worldwide in the fight against insufficient water available for agriculture. You've stated that Canada should be proactive in promoting practices that are responsible internationally. Might you elaborate further on this, please?
Thank you very much for your question. Canada, in my view, should be a world leader in addressing the issues around climate change in agriculture. You're quite correct that the people in the developing world, the arid and semi-arid regions, where some of the poorest of the poor live, carry a very high burden of the impacts of climate change on their livelihoods when they produce less greenhouse gases than we do. I think that we are in a very good position to bring new technologies in climate-smart agriculture, in regenerative agriculture, making use of some of the traditional practices that are being conducted by agricultural producers with more things like green manuring and the use of cover crops, for example, to help to buffer the impacts of droughts on the livelihoods of people. And so I would like to suggest that Canada, as I said in my presentation, play a much stronger leadership role in the United Nations agencies.
Thank you.
To help to address your points.
Very good. That brings us to the end of our first panel. Dr. Madremutu, if you have any examples of the kinds of projects that the government could fund internationally to achieve the goals that you've enunciated, please do not hesitate to, even if they're short synopses, to send them to the clerk, and they will be fodder for the report. We'll stop there. I want to thank the witnesses and the members for this round of questions and answers, and we'll pause for a couple of minutes to onboard our second panel. Thank you again. start with our second panel. We're up against the clock here. We'll start with Mr. Kaveh Madani from the United Nations University. Yeah. Yeah, they don't have this is not going to, you're not going to get it in the next 2 or 3 weeks because they don't have the, there's some processing time to get the, but I ask every day. Okay, yeah, so we'll start with Mr. Madani for 5 minutes, please, from the UN University Institute for Water. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable committee members, allow me at the outset to express my profound gratitude as the Director of the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment and Health to the people and government of Canada for nearly 3 decades of supporting us. The 1996 decision to host what is known today as the UN Water Think Tank is reflective of Canada's progressive and visionary thinking. Yet, when it comes to water, Canada has much more to offer on the world stage. Building on its firm commitment to multilateralism and proven record of peace building, Canada has an unprecedented opportunity to turn water into a pillar of its foreign policy with significant global and national security benefits. So I encourage your committee to take these 3 recommendations into consideration. Recommendation number 1. Make water a foreign policy priority, use water for peace building, and establish Canada as a leader in the water space. Despite its fundamental importance, water is still an orphan child in international politics with no UN agency that is entirely dedicated to it. This gap creates a great political and also a wonderful business opportunity for Canada, a nation that has all that is required to serve as the world's water leader. Besides being a solution provider, thanks to its solid talent pool, Canada's geography puts it in a highly unique position from the water standpoint. With access to 7% of the world's renewable water supply, Canada's identity is tied to water. The experience of dealing with the most diverse range of water management problems has equipped Canada with the expertise and reputation needed to guide and set an effective solution path for the world. One immediate opportunity for Canada is to influence the global water action agenda, in addition to promoting its scientists and businesses, is hosting the next UN Water Conference in 2026, soon after the establishment of the Canada Water Agency. I also encourage Canada to consider taking the issue of water to the UN Security Council, given its peace and security implications. Canada must also consider making water an integral component of its peacekeeping missions and international development projects. Recommendation number 2, put farmers at the center of the water agenda. No water agenda can succeed without a true appreciation of the role of farmers in managing water. Unfortunately, many national and international sustainability and climate agendas marginalize farmers and overlook their significant role in managing 70% of the global water use. These reductionist and often energy-centric policies that ignore how investment in the water and agricultural sector benefit or fight against climate change, hunger, poor health, poverty, and injustice are doomed to fail and must be immediately revised. Robust water policies that put farmers at the center are not vulnerable to the change of political appetite in Ottawa or any other capital in the world. Accordingly, Canada's domestic water policies and international water leadership must promote the role of farmers and their potential to help the world mitigate its water, climate, and security problems. Recommendation number 3, take advantage of the water-related UN entity that Canada hosts. The United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment and Health would have not existed without Canada's thoughtful and generous support. This institute is one of the few UN entities in the world with a water-focused mandate and can serve as the gateway that connects Canada to the UN agencies and those in need of Canada's water knowledge and technology. Canada is currently underutilizing this UN entity to promote its talents, solutions, and resources. Through a systematic cooperation with the government of Canada based on a clear and water-wise foreign policy, the United Nations University can do much more to ensure that Canada, its researchers, innovators, businesses, farmers, politicians, and water activists get the recognition they collectively deserve, as we are cognizant of what Canada has to offer and how the world can benefit from its water leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vidani. We'll go now to Ms. Ito in Scotland, I believe.
Hi there. Okay, so I understand that you probably have a handout, a printout that was circulated amongst you, which I'm going to walk you through. To give you a little bit of background, I've been advocating for the recognition of the rights of nature as the foundation of all the other rights. Now, if we are to solve our issues to do with freshwater, we cannot look at it in isolation of all of the other systems. Freshwater can't be isolated from our ocean systems, from the rest of the water cycle. If we want to have clean water, we also need to look at agriculture. We need to look at the entire economic system, because everything is interconnected. If we think of our human society as an iceberg, all of the crises that we see, the economic crises, the sixth mass extinction, the climate change, pandemics, ill health, all of these crises are just above the watermark. But if we look beneath the surface of the water, you have the structures in the systems, the silo systems, which come from a mechanistic worldview, which come from a separation consciousness that separates the human being from nature, which has been encoded in law, because in law, nature is objects, property, and resources separate to the human being. And this leads to a degenerative cycle which produces all of these crises on autopilot. And most of our societal solutions are all about acting on crisis management, trying to see how can we avert climate change, how can we avert, the various crises that are happening. But that's the lowest point of leverage that we can act at. If we want to really resolve our problems and move towards a thriving future long term, and to really be leaders on the world stage, we have to look at bottom of the iceberg solutions. We have to look at how can we rebuild that relationship with nature, which is our most fundamental relationship, and to drive that change into law. And this is what we advocate for with nature's rights. So if you were to think of the current sustainability model, you've got people, you've got economy, and you have nature, and you've got your three interlocking circles, like you'll see on the diagram that I circulated. Now, in this model, there's a couple of flaws. One, people have rights, economy has rights, corporate rights, property rights, nature has no rights. But also, there's an assumption that these three circles can operate independently of each other. But this isn't reflective of reality, because in reality, the only one that can operate independently of the others is nature, because the other systems are derived from nature. So without nature, there's no human society. Without nature and human societies, there is no economy. And so what we're advocating that we move to in our governance system is a nested hierarchy of rights that follows the natural order, and that the rights are not adversarial, but they're collaborative and synergistic. So if you look at the model on the right, which is what we propose to the European Economic and Social Committee in looking at a European Fundamental Charter for the Rights of Nature that would encompass the other rights, we built a framework where if you take the three circles and you map out the UN Sustainable Development Goals on each layer, nature, people, economy, and you add a fourth circle at the bottom being the planetary boundaries, you end up with a system where you can map out the rights corresponding to that, where you have economic rights embedded within human rights, which are all embedded within the rights in nature. And this gets rid of inherent conflicts between the rights. At the moment, sustainable development goals haven't been reached. And a lot of the criticism around this is that there isn't a legal framework to achieve it. So with this model, what we're doing is bringing in the nested hierarchy of rights, or the integrated model of rights, as a way of achieving those, driving forward those sustainable development goals, all within the planetary boundaries. We've heard about climate change in this meeting, but climate change is only one of the 9 planetary boundaries. 7 of those planetary boundaries have already been exceeded.
Thank you.
Biodiversity and the nitrogen phosphorus cycle being the ones that are most highly in the danger zone.
We're going to have to stop there, Ms. Ito, and there will be questions, and you can use those opportunities for to add some information.
Absolutely.
Ms. Kavanagh, with Water Rangers, you were with us last week, I believe, no? Or was that a different?
No, that was some of my
a different cat. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry about that. I'm a little mixed up. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm Kat Kavanagh, the Executive Director of Water Rangers, and I co-founded Water Rangers in 2015 as part of the aqua hacking competition by Aqua Action, another witness you had in the past week, I believe. It came from seeing my own father, who had been collecting water quality data for about 20 years at our local lake, and he didn't have the tools to share and understand his data. And this is quite a common picture we see across community groups that care deeply about their local waterways. So Water Rangers set about to respond to community needs for those tools that lower barriers to helping them participate in specifically community-based water monitoring. And we've designed test kits and built an open data platform curated for the public that's being used by 300 groups across Canada, the US, the UK, and even Mexico. In Canada, those groups can automatically share their data set with DataStream, who you heard from on Tuesday, a national database for water quality data. So we know that water quality data is desperately needed, and according to the 2020 watershed reports that was published by WWF Canada, over 60% of sub-watersheds are considered data deficient. And that means we don't even have enough data to give them a score. This is better than it was in 2017, when over 70% were data deficient. It's through efforts of our environmental nonprofits like DataStream and those community-based water monitoring groups across the country that we're starting to make some progress in filling those gaps. There's a long way to go, but we're starting to see a path forward. This year, Water Rangers, supported by Aqua Action, will be publishing the next watershed report. So stay tuned for those results later this year. Since the theme today is speaking to international relationships, I want to give 2 brief examples. We're working with organizations in the US to coordinate and standardize on both sides of Lake Erie through the Lake Erie Volunteer Science Network. Canadians need to play a bigger role here, but there is a willingness and desire to simplify sharing across borders. In the UK, I'm part of a collaborative of over 80 leaders of NGOs, industry, government, and researchers in a program called CASCO. They're investing in my participation and our tools to help create pathways for community-based water monitoring to be integrated into achieving healthier rivers here. Their investment at a national scale is substantial, and it's based on collaborating together amongst all those stakeholders at a watershed scale. There is an example is something we can learn from in Canada. The Brits, though, were impressed about how Canadian nonprofit collaboration is equipping communities to openly share data and share results. I gave them the example of how we're sharing data, community groups through Water Rangers to collect their data, share their data openly, embed it on their own websites to share with their local communities, and then share that data with DataStream to sit alongside government and research data, and then be part of national assessments like the Watershed Report. Coordination, building meaningful relationships, and sharing learnings takes time and effort.
The coordination, évidemment, prend beaucoup d'efforts et du temps. Il y a beaucoup de ressources, mais le Canada en a. Il faut être fier de nos accomplissements. Cette collaborative axée sur la collectivité pour la surveillance de l'eau permettrait aux gens, à la base, d'exprimer leurs valeurs aux bailleurs de fonds. Et ces efforts pour soutenir le développement durable représentent un investissement qui est le plus rentable possible. Ratio de 14 à 1, si vous voulez. On a pu augmenter et renforcer la résilience en matière d'eau. Et l'intendance de l'eau est tout à fait importante. Quelques recommandations alors en conclusion. Investir dans le leadership et l'innovation pour les collectes de données axées sur la collecte et le partage, bâtir une capacité de longue durée.
Now to Mr. McClinchy from the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. You didn't bring a lamprey with you today.
Not today, Mr. Chair,
okay,
no.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. After two failed Great Lakes Treaty attempts, crisis drove the U.S. and Canada to ratify our treaty-based binational mandate to establish and maintain cross-border relationships, to build a body of freshwater science on which to base management decisions, and, of course, to control sea lamprey. These tasks were given to us as political leadership understood that combating invasive species, coordinating harvest policies, and leveraging shared resources could only happen if we tackle challenges together. In other words, where water flows over borders, border-blind management must follow. Our treaty drafters saw water as foreign policy, and the Commission's binational engagement strategy proves it. That's not to suggest that strong domestic freshwater policies aren't needed. History underscores the importance of respecting subnational jurisdictions and rights holders, and our Commission considers partnerships, the application of traditional knowledge, and dialogue with First Nations to be success elements. Our convention drafters made establishing and maintaining working relationships a primary goal. That's because they understood that waterborne threats and opportunities never stay in one jurisdictional silo. Canada has impressive freshwater resources that contribute to our triple bottom line. That's our social, economic, and ecological well-being. Despite this, when it comes to Canada's Fourth Coast, bilateralism is the only way to protect the resource and respect jurisdictional confines, including First Nations rights, while ensuring good governance and sustainability. The U.S. and state governments have demonstrated an understanding of this good governance potential via infrastructure renewal, habitat restoration, research, and coordinated management. And that coordinated management occurs under the Commission-facilitated Joint Strategic Plan for Management of Great Lakes Fisheries, a plan that's been signed by the subnational units. For our Commission and our partners, the Joint Strategic Plan, which I've provided for distribution, has proven its worth. Ontario and the Great Lakes states and Indigenous partners work together to make shared decisions. This non-binding, consensus-based strategy ensures that the management of Great Lakes resources by each of the jurisdictions benefit all the jurisdictions. Water in this context is not a cause for division. Rather, water unites, and our Joint Strategic Plan is an example of that. Fisheries managers have prioritized habitat protections and improvements despite the daunting task. 5 lake committees, which are Joint Strategic Plan elements, provide managers from provincial, state, Indigenous, and federal agencies a forum for discussion. They work through a common framework to identify impediments to fish production and then pinpoint management actions termed environmental priorities. These environmental priorities provide structure, continuity, and value here and in the U.S. Coordinated partnerships then find resources to implement habitat protections, and these projects, which vary in complexity from large-scale, deep-water reef restoration to small culvert replacements, are advancing after decades of inaction. This process of identifying impediments and actions, funding streams, and project accomplishment goals is the vision for sustainable Great Lakes. But the process is only possible due to the Joint Strategic Plan, which helps managers find shared priorities. Prior to the Commission's establishment, this exchange would have been impossible, and success only became possible when we started acting beyond our one border. With the benefit of hindsight, it's clear that viewing water as a foreign policy matter is neither novel nor optimal, or optional rather. We can't afford to view boundary waters as just domestic resources because our trading partners see them through a foreign policy lens. This divergent view is why the interface our Commission uses in the U.S. flows through the Department of State, while through DFO here in Canada. It's a matter of priority. Mr. Chair, in closing, water can separate or unite us. And after years of divided governance and strife, Great Lakes Water has become a uniting force. But that state has taken effort. Establishing and maintaining binational working relationships on this scale has taken decades of trust building. But the investment of energy is positively impacting on the triple bottom line for the communities and governments of the basin. We hope this study will yield the positive results too, so all Canadians can enjoy the benefits of well-managed and sustainable freshwater resources, and we stand ready to help in any way we can.
Thank you, Mr. McClinchy. Mr. Cram for 6 minutes. Mr. Leslie? Okay, go ahead.
6, you said. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with Mr. McClinchy. I understand the fisheries is worth about $7 billion a year. What would you say at this point in time is the biggest threat to commercial fish stocks?
I was actually asked this question not that long ago when crossing the border one time. A border guard asked me, what is the greatest threat to the ongoing sustainability of the Great Lakes? And there's lots of questions or answers I could give to that, but the biggest threat to it is complacency. In many of the meetings we've had with members across the table here over the last couple of years, we've talked about how governments and people like to respond to a crisis. And fortunately, in the case of the fishery itself, there's not a crisis per se, but we need constant vigilance with regards to lamprey control that we look after. If we stop doing it, it immediately becomes a problem. With respect to cross-border collaboration, the minute we take any of that partnership for granted, it begins to fall apart. So there are lots of external threats. There are lots of environmental challenges, climate change, lots of other things, but certainly complacency is top of the list.
So what would your biggest ask of the federal government be? Obviously, you mentioned complacency, and secondarily to that, how would you describe your relationship with recreational fisheries groups in terms of some of the projects you mentioned in terms of water quality and enhancement of our fisheries?
So our organization is premised largely on partnerships. Most of what we do is based on working with industry, with state and provincial partners, federal governments, and so on. Those are the kinds of things we do. So certainly our relationships are strong. Now, we have identified, as I mentioned in my opening comments, an issue where we have a governance interface problem here in Canada that's been a bit of a barrier to those things. So certainly we would have an ask to remedy that. And in the context of this study, the notion of looking at water as a foreign policy priority, that would certainly fit. Now, with regards to the things that we do to set up those partnerships, I might ask my colleague, Ms. Walter, to talk to that, only because that's her area of expertise. That Joint Strategic Plan of Management really is the flagship mechanism. Before it, there was no opportunity, no real conversations across borders. So certainly that's been something that's been successful. Perhaps Ms. Walter can add something to that.
Only that I think that we have a great history of building up these partnerships, both at the agency level, non-government organizational level, and also with recreational fisheries, commercial fisheries, people involved in those. So I would just say that the continuity of that, the ability to continue those relationships is key to doing so.
Thank you. Mr. Madani, I appreciate your comments regarding the way that farmers should be engaged as a solutions provider, as stewards of the land, particularly in Canada. Our southern working landscape is made up largely of privately owned farmland, and I think we are very proud as farming communities of the stewardship we have undertaken and the advancements we've made. I'm just curious, given your kind of global perspective and seeing some of the protests that have come out of various European countries right now, not necessarily all related to water, but a host of other policies being driven down on farmers. Would you say that this is a global problem? In the context of Canada right now, I think there's a very real frustration with the way that our farmers have been had policies imposed on them that they know is detrimental to their own economic imperatives.
It is, and this is due to the fact that many of those who set policies don't understand the political economy water. Water in many countries is used not only for producing food, but also employment. And unless you understand this critical role of water, you cannot set policies that address some of the other problems and solve the threats to the farmers themselves, right? So unfortunately, we have created an unintended competition between some of the sustainability policies or climate actions and the water sector, because we thought water is an impact sector, although water is also a sector to mitigate a lot of those other problems, right? The opportunities that exist in the agricultural sector are too many. And anything you do for the agricultural sector, anything you do to empower the farmers, anything you do to get them prepared for climate change and other disasters and extreme events would benefit other fights against biodiversity loss, fight against climate change, hunger, inequality, and so on. And this is something we don't understand. The problem is more severe in the global south in many countries, that those countries don't have the luxury that you have to be able to compensate the farmers, pull back, change your policies a little bit, because in those places, unemployment means migration, tension, war, and lots of other effects that would not be limited to those regions.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to put the following motion on notice. Given that Stephen Guilbeault, the Minister of Environment, announced there will be no more envelopes from the federal government to enlarge the road network, end quote. Minister Guilbeault also said that the Liberal government has decided to stop investing in roads because the current network is, quote,
Point of order,
perfectly
Mr. Chair.
adequate.
Just a second, Mr. Leslie. Yes.
Is this a different motion than the previous motion where the Conservatives wasted time then? Or are they just putting on notice
This is my
a second
time to ask questions. I'm moving it within my time. I don't think you should be upset with this.
It's not the same motion, is it?
No, it's not the same.
Okay, go ahead.
You're losing at the time of this committee asking that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. End quote on perfectly adequate. To respond to the needs of Canadians. C, moreover, Minister Guilbeault said, quote, we can very well achieve our goals of economic, social, and human development without more enlargement of the road network, end quote. D, Minister Guilbeault has provided no evidence to back up his erroneous claims. E, the Liberal government has not consulted with provincial, territorial, and municipal governments or with Indigenous leaders regarding Minister Guilbeault's announcement. F, drivers in Canada's major cities spend on average 144 hours in rush hour traffic every year, with Toronto topping out at 199 hours, Vancouver 197 hours, Montreal 180 hours, and Winnipeg 173 hours. G, Cam Blight, the president of the Association of Manitoba Municipalities, said, quote, in response to the recent comments made by Federal Minister Stephen Guilbeault that demonstrate a lack of awareness regarding the challenges faced by municipalities, investing in municipal infrastructure, particularly road projects of all sizes, is crucial in fostering economic growth when addressing the challenges posed by a growing population and expanding trade networks. With the reality of our members facing an ever-increasing municipal infrastructure deficit and operating under 19th century fiscal limitations, it is now more important than ever that other orders of government increase investments to support all kinds of infrastructure and work in partnership with municipalities to develop a modernized municipal growth framework for the 21st century. It is a strategic move that not only addresses the immediate needs of a growing population, but also positions municipalities as hubs of economic activity, fostering sustainable development and enhancing their roles in the broader regional and global economy, end quote. H, Minister Guilbeault's plan to end all federal investment in new roads and highways would cripple Canada's economic growth. The committee call on the Liberal government to condemn Minister Guilbeault's announcement, and the committee report its opinions to the House. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We'll go now to Madame Châtel.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et je vais partager mon temps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll share my time with my colleague. And your puppeteer specialists opposite might be able to shorten up their motions so that we can move forward more swiftly.
I cannot tolerate that kind of speech when we're talking about the colleagues. Marionnettist? Did you really say that?
Oui, parce que...
Parce que?
Did you really talk about a puppeteer?
La Chambre des communes aujourd'hui n'a pas répondu à ces questions.
We didn't have those discussions in the House earlier today. Everyone is speaking at the same time. The interpreter cannot follow. So the economic impact, the damage caused by the action or the inaction that the Conservatives would like to see with regard to climate change, well, this could really slow down Canada's economic growth. I was looking at numbers. The projections say that this could have an impact on up to $25 billion worth of goods and other effects if we do what the Conservatives are offering. This is climate inaction because climate change costs a lot of money. I even see that at home. There are municipalities in my region that have to reinforce resilience. Forgive me to interrupt, Ms. Chatel. Forgive me for interrupting, but there's a vote. I was given a message by phone, so we're being called to vote. The bells are ringing. I don't know if we have permission to sit. Do we have unanimous consent to continue? I'm asking the committee what you would like to do. Do you want to continue the discussion? Yes? Very well. So we'll be voting remotely? Go ahead then, Ms. Chatel. I really like the charter you outlined for us because someone in my riding was explaining to me that we can't have economic health without ecological health. So might you explain further how this very simple conclusion of a citizen in my riding and our conclusion that not attacking climate change is very costly, well, how this ties in with resilience for municipal infrastructure, for farmers as well. In my riding at home, they lack water, there are extreme climate events, there are new insects that are appearing. So this costs a lot of money to farmers. We lose crops. Municipalities find this very costly. We can't have a healthy economy if we don't have a healthy environment, if nature isn't in a healthy state. So might you elaborate on these two aspects? How do they integrate?
That's for Ms. Kavanagh? Oh, Ms. Ito. Is she there?
Yes. Yeah, no, I'm still here. Yes, of course. I mean, as I was trying to explain in the beginning, that if we really want to take an integrated approach and we want to resolve our issues, we have to think long term. The problems that our society has created is partly, or I would say primarily, caused by some of the assumptions that are embedded within our legal system that has allowed our economies to develop in the ways that they have. It's allowed us to overexploit the natural world. And if we are really going to turn the tide on that, I feel we have to start with a new beginning, and we have to look at our structures of law and reestablish that that interrelatedness, this understanding that there can be no human health without ecological health, and to see how can we embed that within our legal structures to scale.
Exactement le point.
Exactly. I will now give the rest of my time to my colleague, Ms. Damoff.
Thank you to all the witnesses for being here. My question is actually for Great Lake Fisheries. It's nice to see you, and it's been wonderful to work with you over the years to support the good work that you do. And I know my colleague Vance Badaway has made this his mission to support the good work that you do. And I wonder, in your presentation, you talked about being border blind. A few years ago, I think it was 2019, we had advocated for increased funding, and we were able to get it for you. But you live with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And when you talk about borders, being Parliamentary Secretary at Foreign Affairs, I know, there must be challenges for you living in fisheries, but then also crossing over with the U.S. I'm wondering if you could talk to the committee and maybe make a recommendation on how your agency should work in that whole border blind mentality.
Sure. Thank you for the question,
Fairly
Mr.
briefly,
Chair.
please, if you can.
Sure. So in the United States, we are structured. We have an interface into government. So we interface with the U.S. Department of State. The Congress appropriates money to the State Department. The State Department exchanges, financial accountability in dollars with us, and then we work with partners across the spectrum to execute our programming. That works very well and has allowed multiple partnerships to spring up over the years that have saved government of the United States and the various state governments millions and even hundreds of millions of dollars. In Canada, it's slightly different. We have an interface where Parliament appropriates money to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and then the discussion goes between us and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And the nuance there is that we also contract with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, which has created some challenges and some barriers to those partnerships. In order to remedy that conflict of interest and certainly to allow partnerships to expand more broadly, we've recommended a mirror process to that in the United States, where we would be nested with Global Affairs Canada and interface with them on budget accountability and all of those kinds of things, and still work hand in glove with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the other partnerships that spring out of that.
Thank you. We'll have time for Madame Posé and Mr. Boulris, and then we'll have to stop. Madame Posé, la parole est à vous.
D'accord. Very well. Thank you very much to all of the witnesses for being here with us and for helping us to better understand this very important dimension, which is water, which is essential. Ms. Ito, I would like to put a question to you because I listened to your 2016 talk, a 15-minute talk that was very clear, dense, condensed, very inspiring, but which underscores the issue of a change in paradigm. In my book, if you want to change paradigms, it's a very lengthy process, and it seems to me that we're facing an emergency here with regard to climate change and our relationship with nature. Shouldn't we rather seek out a change in our collective values vis-a-vis nature?
Exactly. And the reason that I've been advocating in the way that I have for change in the legal system is that it's such a powerful way to shift societal norms. Originally, when corporate rights were brought in, there was a massive outcry. Nobody could even envisage how a being that was, not even a being, just existing on the paper, could even be the subject of rights. But now it's massively empowered, this vehicle called the corporation. It led to a whole different economic structure. And I believe in the same way by embedding the idea that...
I must interrupt you, unfortunately, Ms. Ito, because the clock is running. But I wanted to tell you this. We heard another panel. People talked to us about the rights of nature. And one of the witnesses stated that we can enforce and create all sorts of rights, but if we don't apply them, there's a problem. We're seeing, especially in the war between Israel and the Hamas, we see that the fundamental rights of humans are not being respected. So if we give a lot of rights to nature, this could be very interesting, but there will have to be constraints for those who don't respect these rights. What do you think?
Absolutely, that there has to be an enforceability to the rights as well. But how we enforce that, whether we do that by using the rights as a tool to evolve our societal structures, our economic system, our agriculture system, our food system, or whether we use the rights just as a litigation tool, would be entirely up to us. I would say the more powerful use of it is to embed it in society in such a way that industries have to evolve and human rights conflicts have to be resolved in a way that also respect the rights of nature. I mean, fundamentally, even this conflict that we see in Hamas would be against the rights of nature.
Oui. Je vous arrête encore une fois.
Once again, I'm stopping you there, not because I don't find this interesting. On the contrary, it's another way of looking at things. But I have questions also for Mr. Madani. I read your presentation, and I have a lot of questions. The first one is that you state, when you talk about the governance of water, for example, you say that Canada could be well positioned vis-a-vis the Aboriginal communities. Yesterday I met with 2 Aboriginal groups, one in northern Alberta and that doesn't dare drink the water there because it's contaminated and there's a lot of cancer in the local population. And I met with another group. We were talking about the radioactive waste that we're going to be found in our waterways with certain nuclear projects. Might you speak to us further about this? You perhaps have other examples you could provide to us.
There is no perfect system in the world. There is no country that is perfect when it comes to water management. Every system has deficiencies. Last year we published a report which showed the systematic injustice, essentially, and inequity behind the levees of the United States. Your neighboring country, wealthy country, very advanced in technology. You go to every location in the world, there are deficiencies. But don't forget the size of Canada and the diversity of the problems you're dealing with. There's no other, it's hard to find another country of this size with so many diverse problems. The fact that, to claim leadership, share experiences, and learn from others, it happens if you get, I think, more active on the international stage, and I think this is something good for Canada.
Merci. Merci. Alors, je dois aussi vous interrompre.
Thank you. Here again, I must unfortunately interrupt you as well. You talked a lot about the Canadian Water Agency. You're giving it an important role for Canada on the world scene. But when we look at sustainable development, that's a priority for Canada for its charter for 2024. There are 5 priorities here based on this out of 17. But number 6 is clean water, and objective 15 is the ecosystems. And those 2 items aren't even listed as priorities. So aren't we putting the cart before the horse?
I mean, so there are problems. I mean, of course, you have to do much more to get where you want to be and where you deserve to be. But this doesn't, I think, shouldn't stop your nation from getting more active on the international stage. Maybe the establishment of a Canada Water Agency is a historic moment in this country and is a step forward toward where you deserve to be. But there's a lot of work to be done, yes.
Okay, merci. On va passer maintenant à M. Boulris.
Thank you. We now move to Mr. Boulris. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My first question is for Ms. Ito, and I'm sharing this vision of giving rights to nature. Olivier Barrault in France is saying that the climate change, the pollution crisis, plastics, etc., are sub-crises of a broader problem, a more encompassing problem with regard to our relationship with nature. And we were talking about the people on the North Shore in Quebec, and with the Innu community, we've given rights to the waterways there. And I tabled a bill in Parliament in order to give legal status to the St. Lawrence River and its affluents. It's a first in North America, and I'm very proud of this. But this is a movement that is coming up from South America, inspired by Aboriginal cultures. How do you view the role of the government to support this movement for the conservation of nature and the establishment of better relationships with nature?
Yeah, so whilst I'm aware that in South America and in Canada, the cries mostly come from the Indigenous people who haven't lost that awareness of our deep dependence on nature. Without nature, none of this exists. So they've still got their priorities in that way. What we've done in Europe is seen how those principles are actually applicable everywhere, that the whole environmental crisis that we have is a product of the way that we have structured our economies. And our economy, it's legal to have an economy based on infinite growth because nature has no rights. Nature's objects, property, resources in law. Now, this has nothing to do with Indigenous people. This is applicable in our modern system of law worldwide. And I do believe that the Canadian government, by making a stand for supporting rights of nature nationally, and then shifting the whole basis of our society towards a regenerative society will be making a massive leap forward, in leadership for the whole world. So yeah, also I feel that by protecting individual ecosystems in that way, it's a good start, but it won't really realize its full potential if the national legislation works against it, because everything that happens around these rivers, the very actions that are destroying nature are in effect legal. They're part of the way that our economy operates. So if we can use the rights of nature to help us reorientate our economies towards a regenerative society, I feel then we will. It will be much more robust.
Merci. Merci.
Thank you. Someone was saying, someone who believes in infinite growth and with limited resources is either a crazy person or an economist, someone said. Madam Kavanagh, I think, how would a database on water quality, a centralized data bank, how is that essential to follow what's going on in Canada, but also to provide important data for science internationally, globally?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. I think the first step to any action is to understand what your current state is, and how can we know what change we've made if we have no data to say what our current state is. A lot of times that data might be collected, but is not in a format that's easy for us to access, to glean those insights, to innovate, and to come up with those moments of innovation or creativity. And the more that we're willing to sort of share that at a community level, at a watershed level, and at a country level, and then internationally, it is really powerful. And I'm over in the UK. Part of this collective that's sharing and looking at ways for communities to be involved in action towards better rivers. And if there's that willingness for industry, for government to look at data and look at possible solutions, that's the pathway forward. So it's part of that cycle. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd imagine I don't have much time left. You have 1 minute left, sir. I have a minute. Okay. A bit less now. Go ahead. All right. Madam Kavanagh, to keep going on that note, how do you understand the role of conservation or preservation of water quality and water? What role does that play in our global fight to protect the environment?
I really believe in nature-based solutions, restoration, as building resilience in all of those ecosystems. And I see community playing a huge role in supporting their local climate resilience. I think that if we're looking at waterways, things like droughts and floods are huge components of that climate picture, and I really want to see community to be part of building, that resilience for their future.
Okay, le temps est écoulé.
Thank you. Your time is up.
This is for really interesting insights, and all the members for interesting, good questions that brought out those insights. We have a vote now, so we'll have to end the meeting here. It's our 2 hour. We're at our 2 hour mark anyway. So thank you again, and we'll see each other as a committee in about 10 days. Thank you.